You are listening to the Overwatch League Network, the podcast with Deadeye on all the Overwatch League news and information. The show with Tactical Visor on the statistics and analysis. Here are your hosts, Totally Drunk, Spider, and Slambo.
What is up, everyone, and welcome back to Overwatch League Network, the podcast with Deadeye on all the latest Overwatch League news, information, and esports analysis. I am your host, Totally Drunk. At tonight on episode 78, we'll be discussing the latest in Overwatch League news. World Cup makes its return. We have All-Star Game details. We even got our look at the starting lineup, which we'll definitely be discussing, because, things didn't really change all that much. We are hot off the heels of the Dallas homestand weekend and so much more. But before we can get into the news and introduce you to my co-host, I just want to take a moment to thank everyone who is hanging out with us live tonight on Twitch. And of course, thank all of our repeat listeners out there. So as you can see, it's another week, another host rotation. Slambo is out, Spider is back in. And, we just keep going round and round here on OWL Network. But, Spider, welcome back to the show. And, again, thank you so much for, stopping by later in the week, this prior week, as you were on Heroes Never Die.
Yeah, it's always fun to be on Heroes Never Die, because even though we're not that serious of a show, we're still a little more serious. Like, Heroes Never Die is kind of like where you can like untuck your shirt and like really talk shop about Overwatch in general, rather than just focusing on the pro scene. So it's always fun to be on there and shoot the crap with you guys. And I got to be on my first show with Ramses, the man who apparently was spoiling the Game of Thrones episode because he was in the dark the whole time. Other than that, it's fun. We had a good week. We had a huge weekend where we had the first homestand event, and then we had, Game of Thrones, and then we had Avengers. Like, it was a huge weekend. Like, I actually went from watching that Dallas-Houston game straight into Game of Thrones, and that was not a good idea, because the whole time I'm just like, my heart is like still racing, and it's like still building in Game of Thrones. I was like, dude, I need to take like a Xanax or something. Like, this is gonna be a rough night. And then I saw Avengers today, which was good. That's all I'll say about it. But what about you, man? How was your like nerd overload weekend?
Oh man, it was a lot to take in. I unfortunately was not able to catch all of this past weekend's games, despite having a looser schedule, so to speak. At least for the games, but like there was obviously just so much going on. We celebrated my dad's birthday over the weekend, which kind of impacted my viewing of the games. I saw, Endgame twice. Obviously, we had Game of Thrones. I've been playing a ton of Mortal Kombat 11 since that came out. But all in all, like, it was a really good week outside of the weather in the Midwest. We got another like snowfall in this weekend. Of course, now it's already gone, just like it was the last time, but it's just like...
Of course.
I don't know if it's just because of the Night King or what's going on, but, it's been a weird couple of weeks for Chicago weather, even by Chicago standards. But, it's been good. I've been having a lot of fun on the PTR, testing out the workshop, which we talked a little bit about this past Wednesday. And, I have to say, like, we've already seen Blizzard basically adding on some additional like presets based off of some of the things that the community has been building.
Yep.
But from what I saw of the homestead weekend, and of course I'll go back and check out some of the other games that I was not able to watch. And part of that too was because of the early start times. So I ended up missing like a game and a half each day because of work. But from what I saw, things were running really good. I did miss the blackout.
So did I, actually. We have like a big event that we go to every year at University of Maryland, and that just happened to be that day. So I did miss the blackout. But apparently it was like area wide, so it wasn't like just the stadium. Like, it's just bad luck, and the rest of the event went off without a hitch. So it was just bad luck. That's all it was.
Yeah, it's just completely out of the control, but they seem to handle everything just good. But anyways, let's go ahead, let's jump into this week's news. So we got a new sign-in out of the London Spitfire camp. So, while the Spitfire have been making moves, climbing the ranks, with their, fairly strong performance so far in Stage 2, they've looked to bring in some additional backup. So London have gone out and signed another main support, that being, I know this is supposed to be quarter main, because I know that's what he's gone by in the past, but it is quarter main. And this is a player that has been a main support with Samsung Morningstar's Black. That was back in 2018. I want to say he left that team in July, and that was the last time he was actively on the team. But what's important to know about Quatermain is that he was on Cloud9 Condu. This was during like the Cloud9 Condu Panthera merger that was going on, when Cloud9 was basically going after everything and everyone. There's a lot of experimentation getting done. But Quatermain had played alongside Bedosian, alongside Birdrain, so there's already some of that synergy already there. So it's just going to be a really easy roster member to just kind of sub in whenever needed, and then it's not like going out and just getting a new person altogether entirely. So this is someone that's been around Apex in the earlier days of Apex when that was still going on in Korea. With that he was with Africa Freaks Blue. And I know there was this stint where he did this whole rap god routine, which I'm sure people have probably seen on the competitive Overwatch Reddit by now. But it's going to be a backup support for London Spitfire. Obviously, they have Nuss. And, you have Bedosian and Krillin on that flex support line. And, Krillin, I think, has only played one map at this point. I don't know if it's been anything beyond that. But at the end of the day, Spitfire, they know who their core roster is going to be. And, having a backup, I'm not gonna say it's always necessary, but you don't want to put yourself into a position where if someone needs a rest or someone needs a mental break or anything like that, or if there's just a throwaway map, having the option to get someone some playtime is always going to win out at the end of the day, just so that person, can get comfortable with the stage. But you already have someone in Quatermain who is used to kind of that stage pressure just due to the LAN environment of Apex in the yesteryears.
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head. This is purely it screams backup pick. This is somebody that they would want to put in if there's some kind of outside influence, like Nuss is sick, or maybe he needs to go home for something, or whatever it has to be. This doesn't scream like a replacement pick like we're seeing a lot of other teams do right now, especially a lot of lower teams, which London currently isn't. So I think you're absolutely right. I think he's going to be a sub if they need it. They may build him into possibly a main support down the line, depending on how things go. Because with all these young Korean players, there's one thing you have to keep in mind is they do have their conscription military service at some point. So teams with pure Korean rosters have to keep that in their mind for players who are in their 18 to 21 range, because that's typically the years that they end up serving. Not that I think that's the case here. It's just one of the things that as I was researching him, it kind of came up a couple of times. So it's just something to keep an eye on. But London has a good eye for talent, so they probably just want to get a good backup in there. This isn't season 1 Spitfire where you're going to start seeing the rotating, roster here or there. I don't think you have any reason to be worried. It's just them, kind of filling their bench out a little bit.
And really, the only movement we really have seen is if they're just moving Birdrain around due to performance issues if they do arise, because we did see that in Stage 1. But Quatermain, going back, this is a name that had been floated around for a while, going back to the inaugural season. I know there were a lot of links between him signing with the San Francisco Shock. Obviously, they didn't go that direction, but this has really been someone that has influenced a lot of other, Lucio players that we have seen pop up in the Overwatch League. So I'm really curious to see if it's going to be similar treatment to what we're getting with Krillin. I don't know if we'd be in a situation where we see the two of them play together in those map 4 situations when they're up 3-0, or if they're just going to kind of alternate. But at the end of the day, they're thinking long-term here. Obviously, Krillin is still a very young player as well. Quatermain, I'm not sure how old he is. I don't think he's as young as Krillin, since Krillin was basically 18 and boop, he's in Overwatch League. But at the end of the day, this is someone that's had strong links to Overwatch League already. He's been long rumored, and it's nice to finally see him get in the nod. But moving on, we also have a new sponsor for the Overwatch League, and this is kind of gonna circle back to when they had Coca-Cola signing on as non-alcoholic sponsor. Well, sure enough, Overwatch League actually has an alcoholic sponsor at this point. So we keep seeing these sponsorships rolling in for the Overwatch League, and we have AB InBev as the official global beer sponsor of the Overwatch League. So basically, that's Bud Light. Is their main beer. They're the title sponsor, and they were during the Dallas homestand. And the deal between these sides includes, live activations at some key events. They had a ton of sponsored broadcasts on ABC, ESPN2 in the coming months ahead, which includes the Atlanta homestand, as well as there's a rivalry week in LA for one of the weekends. That's coming up in August. They're also going to have a pretty strong presence at the Overwatch League Grand Finals. So there's going to be a lot of interaction there. You're going to start to see more Bud Light commercials during the Twitch streams or during ESPN or ABC. Whichever. I know they had a branded bar at the Dallas homestand event as well. They had the Bud Light night there. And I'm sure we're going to get some more iterations from that. Whether we're ever going to see any crossover, maybe with Overwatch League players jumping into Bud Light commercials, I don't know about that extent. But when the Coca-Cola thing came out, just the way that they phrase it is non-alcoholic, because we were wondering well, does that mean we're gonna get an alcoholic sponsor at some point? And sure enough, it happened the same year, so I'm happy to see that.
I mean, the way they worded it, the specific wording of non-alcoholic sponsor, we both kind of looked at each other, we're yeah, they're gonna get an alcohol sponsor at some point. And the way Budweiser likes to put their name on everything, it doesn't shock me that this is the person that's going to fill that gap. This is the company that does that. So more power to them. It's the same conversation we've had multiple times on this show. More sponsors means more money. It means more growth for the league. It just is better for the league. So awesome that they picked up such a big sponsor. Your feelings aside about their drinks or what's in them, I'll leave that to you. Not my personal favorite, but a sponsor is a sponsor, and someone that size, it's basically the Coke of alcohol drinks. So awesome.
I mean, I much rather would have preferred a whiskey over, a beer brand. But you know what? I'm happy.
I don't think you're gonna get that's the next one. Jack Daniels, the hard liquor for Overwatch League or something like that. I don't see them getting that specific yet.
They should just go out and sponsor the Houston Outlaws, because really, whenever you see them play, you feel like you need a shot.
I don't know. After that last homestand game, it didn't matter if it was Houston or Dallas. I needed a drink. I was out that day because we had a bunch of stuff going on around the house. And then I got all that done. I was like, look, I need to be home for the Dallas game. I can watch the other games later, but I need to be home for the Dallas game. And then I came home and I had 2 6-packs, and my wife was like, what's that for? And I said, the Dallas game if it gets really rough. Luckily, only had one drink. And that was only during map 4. So, yeah, I'll leave it at that till we talk about that later.
Sounds good. Well, anyways, we did get some BlizzCon announcements, and, we're going to talk about the more important aspect of it. We already kind of, hit, the details and all that stuff on H&D this prior week. But we do have confirmation that the Overwatch World Cup is going to return this year. And we do have a couple of changes going into the 2019 World Cup. So basically, all of the stages for this are just going to be, back to back. It's not, spread out throughout the summer. We're not going to have, the group stages where, there's, 3 or 4 different host areas or anything like that. So the way that this is going to work is we're going to have a preliminary round, where we will have the top 5 ranked teams receiving a bye, and then they're going to have an open single elimination bracket. So there's a group stage where you have the top 3 teams per group advancing. So they basically like split the top 5 ranked teams up. So you have the top rank, the 4th rank, and the 5th rank in Group A. And they'll pair that with the open bracket seed 2 and 3. And then in Group B, you have the top rank 2nd seed, 3rd seed with the open 1, 4, and 5 seed. Now, for the group stage, that's going to be held on November 1st. We'll have the playoff bracket happening the day after, so that will be that Saturday at BlizzCon. And we are going to see some expansion of, international coverage, which seems to be happening more and more, especially with the World Cup being broadcast in so many different languages. And everything's going to be covered live on broadcast, which I'm happy to see. Now, what's different about this year is this ranking system. Now, countries are going to be seeded based on a weighted point ranking base, which is going to be revolving around the final placements of the prior World Cups. Then, if there is a tie for whatever reason, that will be decided by the most recent year's results. And then, if it comes down to it, if there's another tiebreaker needed, it will go head-to-head at that point. We have not seen that happen as of yet. But we'll have the 10 highest ranked teams confirmed to be competing at BlizzCon. And of course, they'll get, the works, they'll get their airfare, full support. But everyone basically has the option to play in a LAN environment if they so choose to fly out to, Anaheim. Which, unfortunately, is not going to be an option for everyone. So I don't know how much community involvement there's going to be in regards to, maybe trying to crowdfund to get, a team like Australia or, Brazil, one of the other, countries that has had a pretty decent run in years past, but maybe isn't quite as fleshed out in regards to LAN environments. Because, Brazil's always kind of, been one of the mainstays or in the discussion.
Right.
But, they don't always have that option, but I would not be surprised to see efforts being made by the community there. But looking at where the countries are ranked right now based on this weighted seeding, you have South Korea as the top seed, which, I mean, if you didn't think South Korea was the top seed, I don't know what World Cup you've been watching, because they've won every year. In second, we have Canada, followed by China, France, and the UK to round out the top 5. You notice any team missing out of that top 5?
Australia.
I mean, yeah, that's definitely one of them. But
you mean the good old US of A choke first round? Yeah. I mean, we've watched the World Cup, so I knew they weren't going to be top 5 just from as soon as they announced the weighting. I was like, great. So US based just on last year isn't top 5, so. Statistically, there's no way they could be top 5.
Yeah, statistically, we would be top 8.
Yeah.
Because that's as far as we make it. But the US is the 6th seed in this, followed by Australia, Finland, Sweden, and Russia. So, of course, with the World Cup, there's a whole committee voting. We are going to have a little bit more say this year. We're actually going to be able to vote on a general manager position as well. But all of that stuff is going to be happening, in the middle of May. But all in all, it seems like everything is just kind of, compacted into, this just one weekend. Yeah. And I'm curious to see, if that's just going to be too much. I didn't necessarily hate the group stages that they were doing with the preliminary rounds where everyone would kind of, have a host city, everyone would travel there. There were a couple of, venue issues or, Blizzard just underestimating how many tickets they could sell. So I want to see how this is going to work out in regards to how many countries are actually going to be competing in the LAN environment, as opposed to how many are just going to be playing from home. Is it just going to be a situation where these we'll say the top 10 teams only are going to be yeah, we're gonna fly out, because chances are we're going to be there. but it might leave a couple of, some pretty prominent names that have been very entertaining to watch, kind of like left in the dark. So I don't know. What do you think what are your thoughts on them being like, if you want to play, just fly out?
I did like the qualifiers around around the world where people had host cities, and that kind of got people to BlizzCon. So that aspect of it, I'm not super thrilled about. Like I can understand why they're doing it, and I think crowdfunding will go a long way. And I absolutely think that the names that we mentioned will be there, because one way or another they'll find funding, especially when you're looking at teams like Canada, China, USA, France, teams that have a huge fan base. They'll find a way to get the teams there. As far as like the rest of the structure, I talked about it a lot on Heroes Never Die, but the only thing that I really didn't like about the previous structure was it was across multiple patches, and I think this saves us from that. So I think that's the best aspect of it. Now, whether or not it's going to be too much, we'll have to see. I think it's going to be one of those things is like the first day or two, you're probably going to really hone in on like your team, like probably watch like you and I will probably watch like South Korea, USA, maybe China and Canada, but the other teams, we'll probably be like, oh wow, well, Brazil did this or something like this. But even like the hardcore fans are not going to be able to watch all of it. Like you're going to have to pick and choose. So like the average fan, I think you're gonna pick a country, probably your home country, unless you're Monty, and then you're gonna pick Korea. And watch that and just kind of follow them through the bracket, which is still a cool way to do it. I'm just curious to see the production side of it, because they said they're going to broadcast all these matches at all times. So that's going to be a lot of casters on hand. So I'm interested to see like what the talent is available, not only for the US casters, but internationally as well. So I'm just curious to see how this shakes out in the end. But in the end, it could be the superior format.
So, looking back, there's always a discussion of South Korea and what the lineup is going to be. One of the years it basically just ran New York Excelsior.
Yep.
Plus, like, in addition to that. But, kind of like looking at how the Overwatch League has shaped up this year, do you feel like Vancouver Titans are a front runner in regards to the national roster this year for South Korea?
I think you could be like Vancouver Titans plus like Jonak and Carpe or something like that. Like you'll probably see like a core, like I would probably say a core Titans roster, as long as something major doesn't change. Like maybe the meta shifts between stage 2 and stage 3, and the Titans really crap the bed once they can't rely on 3-3. That I don't expect that to happen, but I'm just saying, what if? And then we might see a little more discussion happen. But as of right now, I think, you'd look at the Titans and they'd be a sure shoe in, and they would probably say, okay, well, we don't just want to take the Titans, so let's throw in like some favorites like Jonak or Carpe or, something like that, because they've been so dominant in the past. I think this is the year that they get super cocky, and it might come back to bite them, but they're all so good it probably won't.
Yeah, I know. We seem to have like that discussion every year. Like, the gap between South Korea and the world is, diminishing further and further, and then South Korea just keeps finding ways to win. So I'm still not going to hold my breath. One day it probably will happen.
It took StarCraft 2 how many years before
right.
somebody that wasn't South Korean to win? Like what, 20 years or something? We got to wait for a while for Overwatch, possibly.
Very good chance, but who knows? We saw a lot of crazy things happen this last year. And I'm really anxious to see how China's going to do it this year, because they kind of like emerged as like their own entity this last year. And of course we've seen the Chinese expansion and the Overwatch League. Obviously Chengdu Hunters being kind of like a main focus of that, just because they seem to have the most fanfare in regards to the newer Chinese teams. But with trying to end, you can expect a lot of Protect the McCree comps, and I'm sure that's going to be the case again this year. But speaking of special events, we also do have some additional details for the upcoming Overwatch League All-Star game, and we do have confirmation that the leak skins that we were talking about on our prior week's episode they're legit. Like, one of the leaks is true, so, we got that very, WoW-esque Mage and Druid armor for, Mercy and Lucio, respectively. But just as a reminder, the All-Star Game is going to kick off on May 15th, with the custom skill matches, so we'll have the return of the Talent Takedown, where the coaches from the Atlantic and the Pacific Division will be drafting teams that consist of the Overwatch League broadcast talent. That will be a 3-map series. We'll see who gets stuck with Sideshow. That'll probably be the team that loses. We have the Widowmaker 1v1 duels returning, which is great. And then we also had fans voting for an additional 2 arcade modes that are going to be played in these custom matches. And we do have the result of these polls. Now, the 2 winners are Sibling Rivalry and Healers Never Die. Now, the Sibling Rivalry has teams consisted of 3 Genjis and 3 Hanzos. And then the Healers Never Die one, pretty self-explanatory. It is support only. There's a 1 hero limit. And I have to say, looking back at the options, I wasn't, too thrilled about any of the options. It was all, you can only play tanks, you can only play DPS, you can only play support. There wasn't, a real standout option to vote on, so it just kind of seemed like a throwaway. But, it was up to the community, and the Genji Hanzo one was by far the most intriguing one out of the lot. But I'm looking forward to the Widow 1v1 because, last year's was pretty unpredictable. It didn't really shake out how we were expecting it to. There were a lot of upsets early on, and it was definitely a cool thing just seeing the headshot only aspect and the amount of crouch dancing that you would see in order to try to avoid the headshots, which was always fun. A little nauseating at times, but it was definitely a standout moment. But Spider, we actually have the voting closed for the starting rosters, and we do know who's going to be started for the Atlantic and the Pacific divisions. So I'm really anxious to get your thoughts on this because not a lot of changes have happened. So for the Atlantic division, we have, a lot of these I can't really argue with. There's probably one name in particular that is kind of okay, you're there for popularity. So Atlantic have Jonak and Arc for the support duo. You have Carpe and Pine for DPS, with a tank line of Poco and Fusions. So all in all, pretty balanced roster. Pine, riding a bench most of the season.
Yeah.
So, I'm sure he'll be happy to see some playtime, even if it is for, basically an exhibition match.
Okay.
And then on the Pacific side, this is where, you have to look at a specific region here.
Yeah, I wonder.
So for the Pacific, you have Ryu Jaehan and Yveltal for the support line, Amain and Gushui for the tank line. And then for DPS, you have Jinmu and Fleta. So 3 hunters.
Ugh.
And Gushui. See, Gushui I can't argue with, at their last year, but sure enough, China having so many votes, they definitely came in full force, and I can't say that I'm honestly surprised that we didn't see too much of a rotation here, based off of kind of how things were week to week, and the mainstays basically being there from start to finish. But it just makes you wonder, how many more Chinese representation is going to be there outside of just the initial vote? Is there still going to be a heavy influence there once it starts to open up, when the coaches and everyone else starts to make their picks for the reserves and whatnot? I don't know, but it was one of those things that just made me shake my head, because when you look at the teams, there's one side that definitely has a lot more balance.
Yeah.
And one side that's just okay, that happened. China, came out in full force, and that's where the Pacific left off.
Yeah, I mean, you had to expect that. It was kind of that way last year, and they kind of put that rule in where the people behind the scenes have more of an impact on it to kind of do that. And they did that this year too, because we only select the first 6. Like the Overwatch League people get to pick the second 6. So I don't think we'll see too many other Chinese members on the Pacific side. Like we might see like maybe 1 or 2 of the Spark. Like I could see maybe like Crystal making it in because he's doing very well. But outside of that, like both sides have key players that didn't get picked. Like when you're looking at the Atlantic division, like you could pull half of the NYXL roster that actually get playtime. So no diss to Pine. It's just we haven't seen him this season. But I mean, the Atlantic division isn't super stacked. Like you could pull people from London. Obviously, Defran would have been a shoo-in had he not retired. You can make a case for Soon in Paris, even though he hasn't played great. He typically would be of that caliber. There's other people on the Fusion that you could see get on there, like Carpe. So at Atlantic, there's a lot of choice, and Pacific, there's even more choice. Like you can make a case for OG, especially after last weekend. Gladiators, the Gladiators are wholly absent on this, so Decay comes to mind. Void, Roar, like they're stepping it up. If you want some more Western, you can even say like Shaz. And then of course there's the elephant in the room. Like, where are the Titans?
Mm-hmm.
Like you have to expect that there are going to be a lot of Titans on this roster, if not most of them. Like so you're looking at like Bumper, Haskell, Simusu, John. Like you could just name it. Twilight. Like you could just name the Titans, and these are all like high level top 3 in their position players. So I don't think we'll see too many more Chinese players on that side. We may see like a coach, we may see like talent or whatever they want to dub outside of that, but I don't think we're going to see too many more Chinese players per se. So and like you said, this is pretty much what it's been since day 1 voting opened. So okay, that's our first 6. We'll wait to see what the next 6 are.
Well, I doubt it's going to be half hunters for the Pacific.
No, they nailed pretty much the majority of the top tier hunter players.
Yeah, I don't know if I would say Veltal is in the discussion for that, but that's just me. Support line I don't think is their strong point of that team. But anyways, we're just coming out of the Overwatch League homestand weekend, which of course took place in Dallas because they were the hosts, and we had a lot of cool stuff happening over the weekend. So again, like if you didn't tune in, the games were Saturday and Sunday. When they had power. I thought it was funny, like when I was reading about like the blackout, like basically like the PCs still had like backup power.
Yeah.
So they were still running, but like nothing else would have been running.
Apparently, what happened is the full scale blackouts are very rare there, but like the power flickers are common, and apparently it was just enough of a power flicker that it took like the stream and stuff down. It took like a lot of the general systems down, but the computers stayed on, which is good because that made restarting it easy. They just kind of had to get everything back up and running, especially at something this size. So luckily it wasn't like the full scale like what we saw, like what was it, 4 or 5 years ago at the Super Bowl, where like everything went down and you had to wait for like an hour. Luckily it wasn't like that. It was more like a power flicker that it just took time to like reinitialize everything.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, but a lot of cool stuff happened just in these 8 matches throughout the weekend. So, my soulmate isn't here tonight, but for those that were curious, Seoul Dynasty did come out 2-0 in what a lot of people would consider like a trap week, because they face Houston Outlaws as well as the LA Valiant. And the Valiant pushed the Dynasty to a map 5 in that series. Mm-hmm. Now, what's been interesting is, the Valiant have picked up a couple of wins this stage after, a very rough start. We've seen them starting to experiment a little bit more, where, we've seen Izayaki coming out at times in order for them to bring in Kariv, and Kariv has been playing flex support when he's been in, and, when Kariv came in and he was just doming Ryo Jaehan, like, I was definitely like, oh no. Like, you could just feel the momentum shifting at that point. Because Ryu Jaehan kept getting picked off first in those instances, and I was definitely worried going into that 5th map. But of course, they subbed Kariv back out, put Izayaki back in. But the flex support role on that team came up big in clutch situations, but it was not enough for the Valiant to come out on top. But, the Valiant, I feel like a lot of the team's issues, obviously, the Zarya position in particular in Stage 1 was rough, but it seems like a lot of what they were dealing with was just mental, because, they kept losing and weren't able to pick up that many map wins, and then it kind of, rolled over into Stage 2, and now they kind of got that behind them, and we started to see them string together some series and some stronger efforts against the stronger teams. So they've definitely had a lot more to build off of in this stage, but for the Dynasty, after only having played 3 games going into this homestand weekend, they really needed to win both of these games, because they still have a second match against the Vancouver Titans coming up, and they're already at 2 losses. We know, the 4-3 record is basically the cutoff point. You need a 5-2 record to basically guarantee yourself a spot in the playoffs. So to come out 2-0, while, maybe not as good of a differential as you may have liked, it was still +5. But they at least put themselves into a position where they're going to have a little bit more breathing room. But, that can't be said about all of the teams. You have... we had a pretty major upset, I'd say, this weekend between Chengdu Hunters and the London Spitfire. Hunters actually came out on top of that one, 3-1. So Chengdu is another one of those teams that's kind of on the bubble. London have already secured their spot in the stage playoffs, so there is that going for them. But with the Hunters, as always, you can expect heavy DPS compositions, and that's definitely what they brought to the forefront against the Spitfire. So I highly recommend everyone going back and watching that one in particular. But at the end of the day, the energy in the arena for the Dallas versus Houston game was definitely surreal. It wasn't a 50-50 split by any means.
No.
It's hard to kind of gauge it based on a broadcast, but I would say it was probably 70-30.
That's about what I would say it was, for sure. You could definitely hear the Houston fans when Houston was doing things, but yeah, I'd say 70-30 for sure.
And if you did not check out this game, it's important to note, Dallas Fuel finally put a feather in their cap on the Houston Outlaws. They finally picked up that win, and what better time to do it than at the Dallas homestand. So why don't you go ahead and talk a little bit about that match, as I know kind of going in really across the board with our network hosts, there was a lot of hesitation and not a lot of confidence on either side of the front, but sure enough, Dallas Fuel ended up coming out on top this weekend.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about it a little on Heroes Never Die, and last week on Overwatch League by the Numbers, they danced around the subject tepidly. So neither one wanted to commit, so I had to come in and step up for Bob and commit to say Dallas is going to win this. But yeah, I mean, there's always a little bit of hesitation, because we always get the Chad Houston, Seoul got Houston Outlaws, Seoul got the Houston Outlaws we have seen this season. We got Raucous on Hanzo type of Houston Outlaws. But there's just something about the Battle for Texas match that Houston's okay, look guys, I know we're not very good, but let's go out there and pretend like we are, and we might just be good enough to fool them. And that's basically what happened, because there were times Houston looked decent, and then Dallas would shoot themselves in the foot and give a map to Houston or give a point to Houston. It was tough to watch. But all things aside, Houston played above what they have been. Like they played much better. They still have a lot of problems. Like their alt usage is bad. But like the first map was pretty one sided. Like Lijiang, Dallas actually typically struggles on Lijiang. In the first point, Houston never even got to touch. The second point, Houston did well with their DPS comp. The problem with that comp is once you lose the point, it's hard to retake it with a Pharah comp. And they weren't able to, so then they switched to goats, and we know how Houston does with goats. So Dallas actually full held that. They went 99-0 and then came back and took the second point. So that was good for them. But then Houston were like, okay, hey guys, look, we're Houston, right? We have Jake Rat, we have Linkster, who's like a hit scan prodigy. Like, let's just play what we used to play and see how it goes. And it worked really, really well. Like this, I hate to say it, but it made Monty's point for him. Like they played the Jake Rat on the first point with Linkster on Widow, which is like the traditional Anubis A comp. And they almost held Dallas until Zachary got off a blade that wasn't great, but it was better than AKM's was last season. And it was able to at least get a pick or two. And then we saw, them drop the Widowmaker, and Linkster went to May, which you don't typically think of May as a great, defensive player on Anubis, but she is really good. It's just we don't get to see her a lot. And they were able to just stuff Dallas. Like Dallas didn't know how to get around that. And on their attack, Houston didn't look great, but in this meta right now, if you attack 3-3 into 3-3, you're almost always eventually going to take it. Like you have to pull off an amazing defense to stop it. So they did eventually take the whole map, and that was good. Like that was them playing to their strengths. But then we go to Kings Row, and Houston just decides to play 3-3, and they mix some Sombra in there and stuff. But Dallas at that point kind of figured out, okay, well, if you're going to drop Diva, we're going to put Unko on Ana and just out heal everything. And Unko, like you don't typically think of Unko as like a top tier Ana, because that's not really how he made his name. But he definitely like made a point of it this weekend to be like, look, guys, I can throw it down with some pretty good Ana sleep darts and grenades and stuff like that. Like there are multiple anti-nades that he would throw down, or healing grenades to keep like OG alive. And that was Kings Row. Like it was basically the Unko on Ana show. Like anytime Dallas would get in trouble, there would be like a grenade or something in there. OG played like super aggressive, was highly out of position multiple times, and he wasn't punished for it because Houston didn't have the tools available to punish him for it. And then there was one point on Dallas's attack where they did actually get stopped at point B, and it looked like Houston was finally gearing up for like a long-term defense, and they kind of stopped him once or twice. Houston fans are getting louder and louder, and then OG hits like the sickest pin. He hits a trancing Raucus, like it just pins him like across the map. Like he just swerves in between the walls and then takes Raucus like back to the fuel spawn, and they kill him, and then they just walk forward and eventually take the map. Like that was awesome to watch. Like you don't typically see something like that happen. And then we go into map 4, and map 4 hurt to watch because like everything's going great on point A. You're like, yeah, Fuel just walked over him on point A, and then they get stopped. And if anybody who has played Gibraltar knows, like point B sucks if you stop at point B. Like if you get stuffed at point B, you're almost done with that map. And that's basically what Houston did, because Dallas refused to switch. Like they stuck on the Rhine 3-3, which is really hard to begin with on that point. But even worse when, Houston has such a huge, alt advantage at that point. Like everything was in Houston's favor, and Houston ended up holding them for almost 4 minutes until they switched to Winston. And it was like something changed in Dallas. And this is what I've been talking about. Like when you put OG on Winston, like just the whole dynamic of the team changes. Like they get more aggressive, they get more, I don't know, like they just get more coordinated. Like the sleep darts were coming out. Like it was crazy to see the kind of stuff that was going on. And they eventually finished the map with, I think it was like 50 seconds or something. It was like 40 seconds or something. And then Houston turns around and Dallas almost full holds them. Like Dallas almost full holds them on point A. They're running a soldier defense, which is very uncommon, but the casters pointed this out. Like, Houston didn't have the players in to combat a soldier defense. Like, they didn't have a hit scan player at that point. They did not have anything to deal with the soldier outside of just gearing up alts, and then when they got their alts, they messed them up. So Dallas had everything in their favor. Like, all they had to do was just keep soldier on the high ground, wait out the clock, let Houston try to dive into them again, and then just blow them up. So what does Dallas do? Oh, they get cheeky, hide around a corner, try to go for a flank nano visor. Well, hey, what's the one ultimate that works really well when your team's grouped up? Oh, I don't know. Graviton? Like, the one thing that Houston had. So Dallas, like I said, shoots themselves in the foot, gives them point A, basically gives them the rest of the map, because Dallas almost never recovers at that point. They make one stop on B, but Houston just comes back and just takes B and then takes C. So then I'm sitting there like, oh god, this is like textbook Dallas. Like, Dallas gave us hope, and now they're just gonna take it away. Even though I wasn't worried, because I knew if it did go to a map 5, Dallas had it in the bag, just based on Houston's record and how Houston plays control. But I'm like, all right, Houston's going to make a push. And they do pretty decent. Like, they go through, and then they eventually get stopped by EMP and stop short of point A, which is typically what you would expect from a 1-minute time bank, unless something crazy happens. So then Dallas goes on an attack. I'm like, all right, cool. Dallas just rolled over them the first time. They're going to do it again the second time. No, Dallas gets stuffed. Like, they lose the first fight bad. Like, it was probably one of the worst, like, lopsided fights they've lost all night, because Houston at that point has like 2 alts coming online for the last fight. It's so in Houston's favor. And then in what I can only describe as the most Houston thing I've ever seen, like, they just blow all their alts. They don't get anything for it. Zach at this point had switched to Sombra, built an EMP in like 30 seconds, just EMPs, dies, but then the rest of the field just clean up the Outlaws. And the Outlaws had like everything in their favor. Like, they should have won that map hands down, but they just couldn't close it out. And as a Fuel fan, I've been there. Like, that happens to Fuel all the time. So I was in chat, I was like, oh, thank god this is over, because I don't know how much more I could have taken of that, because like but as a whole, like I said earlier, Houston played well above what we expected of them, and they made a match out of it, which is what you want from like the headliner Battle of Texas. Like, you don't want another like 4-0 stomp like we saw with like the Fuel and the Valiant, or Soul's first game. So I think as a whole, I think it was entertaining. It was fun to watch. Like, I think if you weren't a fan of either team, you can go back and watch it and stuff like that. But anybody who watches the match, you can be like, oh my god, the Fuel should have won that map so easily. Like, you can make a case for they played bad on Anubis, but the other maps were definitely like heavily Fuel favored. The only people, it was like Dallas versus Fuel at that point. So what about you? Like, what did you think of the match overall?
I thought it was pretty good. I will say with the Outlaws, that is the team that I do tend to troll the most, but I was really happy to see the OG Anubis bunker comp of the Widowmaker Junkrat, because that has been something I've been waiting to see. It's like, well, you have Linkser, who just sitting on the bench primarily throughout most of this. Like, that's still not a bad composition to run, even in the current meta. And that did kind of force Dallas Fuel to run dive, so Zachary moved over to Genji, dashes in, gets blown up immediately by the J-Crat, which, I laughed at, because, he just dashes it, boom, deleted. It was just a feels bad moment for the Fuel in that case, and, they were fortunate enough to end up getting A with, like, around a minute left, but, the Outlaws looked a lot better on that map. And, it was another tactic that we don't necessarily see a whole lot on point B. Normally, if it's like an off, DPS on point B, it would usually be Reaper, in some situations. But, like, I want to see, like, more stuff like that from the Outlaws. We need to see more experimentation, because if they're just going out and running 3-3, well, we know that's not going to work more times than not, because I feel like Houston are very stubborn in the sense that there are just times where they either don't want to run Zarya, or they just don't run D.Va, and then you just see an Ana coming out on the other side, and then that just exposes them that much further. They have no way to really deal with the Graviton surges, or they just get anti-nated, and then it's just all she wrote from there on out. But I hope to see more of that experimentation going on. But, it's just one of those things. Like, we saw a lot of Spree coming in this match. We got to see Jake back in the lineup, and it's one of those things with Houston and their fan base. And I know I tweeted this with one of the gifs I tweeted out, but like whenever they bring in Spree and Jake, and they end up losing, Houston just kind of gets confused because there's like this kind of like mentality that whenever Jake is in, things are magically just going to run better because he's the vocal leader of the team. And while yes, he is the vocal leader of the team, you can't just like sub in a player and just assume everything is just gonna magically work itself out.
It's weird. It's weird to look at Houston now compared to season 1 Houston, because Spree actually looked pretty good yesterday. Like when AKM solo grabbed him on King's Row, I wasn't mad. I was like, yes, get rid of him because he is causing you a problem right now. But it's weird to look at Houston and be like, they don't have a D.Va player that plays well in this meta. Like, it's really weird to look at Houston and be like, you guys don't really have a competent D.Va player. When last season we were like, man, Muma and Coolmat are like one of the best tank lines in the league right now. Coolmat played map 4, but I don't think he really stood out. Like, he didn't do anything that I would consider like noteworthy. Like, No was eating ultimates and stuff. Like, I think Coolmat might have gotten one, maybe. And Dante just has not impressed me on D.Va at all. Like, I think when Dante's in, you can almost expect, like, it's almost like stage 1 fuel. Like, you just expect the somber goats at that point, and you just play around that. So it kind of makes them very one-dimensional, which you can't do right now. Like, sure, there are teams like Vancouver who play 3-3, and they're going to play 3-3, but the reason they can play 3-3 is they have a top 3 player in every position. And even when they play 3-3, they're not opposed to subbing out Reinhardt for Winston if they need it, like if the map depends on it. Or putting Bumper on Hanzo if they really want to troll. But that's a whole different point. Whereas like the Outlaws, like none of their D.Va players are really getting the job done at this point. It's weird to see like the switch between the Fuel and the Outlaws, because that was the Fuel's problem last season, is they did not have a D.Va player that could play dive. Like Mickey wasn't doing great. It wasn't until Seagull came in stage 4 that you could say like the Fuel had a D.Va player who could play that meta, and that's what Houston looks like they're having a problem with right now. So it becomes a question of, okay, do they need a new D.Va player, or do they just need to put like Coolmat in like a time chamber or something and get him trained back up, because he's not getting enough playtime since they brought in all these other players. It's weird to have that conversation about the Outlaws, but that's where they're at right now. They need to like figure out their D.Va problem, among other problems. Like, I'm not saying that's their only problem. Like I said, alt usage, alt tracking as a whole seems to be an issue, because they miss time a lot of alts, when other teams seem to have that pretty well taken care of. Strategies seem to be getting better, so at least that's on an upswing. But it's a strange dichotomy to look at, last season versus this season, and how metas vastly change your perception of players. Because like, I loved watching Coolmat, and now I'm like, oh god, Coolmat's in. Like, this is not great for the Outlaws.
Yeah, and not to mention too, it's just like, well, we've kind of seen, we praised Dante Sombra last year, and I don't feel like we've seen the Outlaws really be able to capitalize out of the Sombra usage either in the current meta. So it's very like dynamic, like how much of a difference it's been between the seasons. But I do think, the D.Va spot in particular is definitely one of the weaker spots because, when Dante is in, if he's not on the Sombra, they will usually have him on the D.Va, which isn't a primary role of his or really a role that he has spent a lot of time on either. So, whether or not they are going to be buyers at one point this season remains to be seen, but, with all of the talk about, their parent organization, that's probably not going to be the case. But it definitely is something that has been exposed quite a bit and will probably continue to be punished moving forward. But at the end of the day, with the Dallas homestand, I have to say, obviously, the energy of the crowd was amazing. I know there was a lot of discussion about, people booing in esports, and that's just silly. I mean, that happens in literally every sport. Regardless of if you want to classify something as a sport or not, it's going to happen.
Wait till they start throwing things.
Yes. Yeah, we don't need any squid incidents, or anything like that. But what I really liked about the Dallas homestand in particular, though, was the fact that you essentially had two home crowds, because you had Dallas there, you had Houston there, and I'm really curious to see what sort of energy the Atlanta homestand is going to have, just because it's not going to have basically two home teams at that particular venue. So I'm really curious to see how that one is going to shake out. But, for a first impression for Overwatch League traveling, I was really thrilled to see how well everything went outside of, obviously the unfortunate event that happened with the whole blackout, but they definitely handled it. And I know a lot of contributors were out there, so when Bob gets his voice back, I think Overwatch League Recap is planning on recording tomorrow night, but I'm definitely going to go check that out, and hopefully Bob will be back 100%, so we can get some insight on how everything went there from a fan perspective, because fortunately none of us were able to go. But with Stage 2 Week 4, we have the playoff picture really starting to take shape, and this is going to move into our main discussion, which of course will be our Stage 2 Week 5 preview. So speaking of the playoffs, we have 4 teams as of right now that have been eliminated from playoff contention this stage. So that includes the Florida Mayhem, the Houston Outlaws. That was a bonus perk for Dallas to get in the win, eliminated in Houston. Not that we really thought Houston was going to make the cut, but, it's just the notion that Dallas was the team to put that final nail in the coffin.
That was nice.
We have Washington Justice. And then, the horse that Sambo and I tried to back out of the Chinese teams, the Guangzhou Charge.
Wow.
Feels bad, man. But you know what? Watch. I will laugh so hard if Chengdu doesn't make it either, and then it's just like, well, then we're all wrong. But anyways, we have 5 teams that have clinched their playoff spots, so that includes the LA Gladiators, who are currently in that top seed. We have the San Francisco Shock, Vancouver Titans, New York Excelsior, and the London Spitfire. So we got a couple more spots up for grabs. We have quite a few teams in the hunt right now. We have 2 teams that have 4 wins under their belt. That includes the Dallas Fuel and the Hangzhou Spark. Both are 4-2 currently with 1 match left. You have the Seoul Dynasty, who are 3-2. With a pretty good map differential, +6, but again, one of those 2 remaining games is against Vancouver, so that might come into effect here. But, with map differential, if they play Titans close, that map differential is definitely going to come into play. You also have the Shanghai Dragons, who are 3-2, and then kind of you have the 2 bubble teams. You have the Chengdu Hunters, you have the Philadelphia Fusion, who are sitting at 3-3. Hunters have a +2 map differential. You have Fusion, who have a +1 map differential. And, with only 3 spots left up for grabs, if Dallas and Hangzhou, pick up this next win, they're guaranteed a playoff spot, pretty much, like at this point, just based on how the probabilities work. But it seems like going into the final week, that A spot is going to be up between essentially 4 different teams. So I don't know who's going to come out ahead between the Dynasty, Dragons, Hunters, and the Fusion, but I feel like out of those teams, based off of their performances, I think Fusion is probably the bigger surprise that haven't really secured a spot, just because they have had the option to play more Winston in this current stage. And Hunters, despite having the easiest strength of schedule, are only sitting at 3-3, which is also kind of a surprise as well.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, you have to kind of expect the Fuel to win because they play the Mayhem. If there is an upset there, it's a much muddier picture for the playoffs at that point. The Spark playing Soul is a big one. Like that will really shake out who is going to the playoffs, and that's the last match of the week. So that we'll talk about our marquee matches here, but that's definitely one to keep an eye on. I'd like to see Shanghai get in there just for the storyline. I'd like to see Chengdu get in there just for Ameng to kind of get his playoff game out of the way. But at the end of the day, like I think the safe bets right now are Fuel, Dynasty. Like you have to think Dynasty will hopefully play the Titans close. And then pick up another win to be able to go in through map differential. And then the other teams, it's really going to come down to who helps who. Like it's such a muddled picture for that ace spot, like you said, that it really depends, like map differential, who's played who, all that kind of stuff like that. That gets super muddy. But if I had to like look right now, I would almost lean maybe Spark or Shanghai. Like it's so hard to say. Like normally going into last week, we can really look at it and say like, okay, this person needs to win, this person needs to lose. But if this person loses, then this person has a spot. That's not really the case this time. It's really going to come down to like it's like day by day basis. Like, okay, well, who plays today? Okay, so we know very early if the Fuel are in, because I think they're on the first day, if not the first match. So we will know very early if we're playing for 3 spots or 2 spots at that point. But after that, like it's going to get very muddy. So I think Chengdu and Fusion are the long shots because they both are going to need help getting in just based off of map differential. Fusion much more than Chengdu just because of the map differential and all of that.
Plus, the Fusion faced a Shock on Thursday. So that's not an easy draw either for your last match of the stage for contention.
Whereas Chengdu, I believe, plays Washington, right? So
yeah, and they also play no, it's not Washington. I think they face a Valiant, the Hunters.
Either way, not quite as bad, but yeah, I can tell you exactly who they face. Chengdu play the Valiant, yes. Whereas Shanghai plays Washington. Shanghai was the one I was thinking of. So Shanghai plays Washington, and then they play the Shock. So Shanghai will have to win out against Washington, which isn't something I wouldn't expect, and play the Shock close. So like looking at it, it's really weird because like the first day's matches, it's like we're gonna know if the Fuel are in, and we're gonna know if the Fusion are in at that point. Because if the Fusion lose to the Shock, they're pretty well eliminated at that point. The second day, Friday, doesn't matter. Like it just straight up does not matter for playoffs. Like it matters for season playoffs, but it does not matter for stage playoffs. Third day, Well, I guess second day, the last match counts because it technically flows into the next day. So the last match is Shanghai versus Washington. So second day doesn't really matter except for that last match, and that doesn't matter because you can kind of expect Shanghai to take that one, and if they don't, that's a big upset, and that's a different conversation. Third day, again, kind of waiting for the last match because you have to expect Seoul to lose to Vancouver. I hate to say it, but that's the expected result. So it comes down to Chengdu versus the Valiant. And then the last day, I guess Seoul versus the Spark. So, yeah. So, I mean, each day there's really like one match, and it just happens to be the last match. Mm-hmm. So, if you're on the East Coast with me, and you're really wanting to know what the playoff picture looks like, expect to stay up late.
Absolutely. So looking at some of the marquee matches, obviously there are a couple of matches that do have pretty big implications of the playoffs. So like that Fusion Shock one, you know, Fusion are definitely huge underdogs in that one. And, you know, mm-hmm. even if they win that, you know, just looking at their map differential, they are definitely the odd man's out. Yep. But, you know, that's still going to be a good match. I'm curious to see if Fusion decide to try to run Rhine 3-3 against the Shock. I feel like that would be a very big mistake. Dynasty Titans is going to be big. There's also kind of like the storyline of the Titans right now having tied the longest win streak in Overwatch League history, which they'll look to break against Toronto Defiant. But for the Titans case, it is important to note that the Titans do play in back-to-back days, so that might come into play when they do go up against the Seoul Dynasty on Saturday. So, you know, outside of that, I feel like the Hunters Valiant game is going to be like one of the sleeper picks, just because, you know, Valiant have been experimenting more. We've seen better looks out of them. So I don't know if that means like maybe the upset potential is going to be stronger in this case against the Hunters, but I feel like the Valiant are just kind of in this weird spot where they've looked better, but they're still the Valiant at the end of the day, and I don't want to put too much stock in them. But with how they fared against the Dynasty, they're definitely a team that can play the role of the spoiler. But for me, like, out of all of the games, the Dynasty Spark one in particular is definitely going to be my pick of the week. Because when you look at the Spark, like, yeah, they're 4-2, but they have a -3 map differential. If they lose that last game, that puts them in a really bad spot. Because we've seen, like, even if you finish 4-3, does not guarantee you're gonna get a spot in the stage playoffs. And, you know, as a Dallas fan, you know all too much about that. And that wasn't even a positive map differential, but it wasn't a negative one either. So there is that. But when we look at what's at stake, you know, this week, obviously we're gonna get the full playoff picture. You know, Titans right now have won 15 matches in a row. So if they beat Toronto Defiant, they'll break that record, along with, you know, all the other records that they've collected along the way, you know, Runaways in Overwatch League Radio, all that good stuff. But for like the Outlaws and the Valiant this week, I want to see them continue to experiment with their lineups. Maybe Outlaws are just gonna be like, you know what, we don't need D.Va. Maybe we'll see more Mei coming out, depending on what maps we're gonna be seeing played. But I want them to lose that mentality of them feeling the necessity of having to play 3-3. Because they have options, but I don't know, it's very frustrating to watch because, like, you want to see them do better. But, you know, at the end of the day, Houston is go to Houston.
Basically.
And that's a feels bad man moment. And really, the other key match that we haven't brought up is Atlanta Reign versus the New York Excelsior. So we'll see whether or not Atlanta can pull off that second win over New York Excelsior at this stage, because, you know, a lot of people looked at that last win of, you know, Atlanta did a lot of things right, New York did a lot of things wrong, and we'll see with more preparation time if New York is just going to come out and basically trounce Atlanta this week.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely one that I'm keeping my eye on. Like I talked about on Heroes Never Die, it's not really a conversation yet we had after the first one, because I think it was Monty who coined the phrase that NYXL basically schedule their days off to lose. So it's almost like they plan it out. Like, okay, we're off next week. We're gonna let this one go. So we'll see how that goes. Like, and if by some happenstance Atlanta wins again, then we're gonna have a very very interesting discussion next Monday when we really start to talk about the NYXL and if this is shades of stage 4 NYXL. Like, are they starting to lose their touch? But we're not there yet, so it's just something to keep an eye on. Like I mentioned earlier, like the big storyline I'm following is obviously the Fuel, but beyond that, it's the Dragons, because if the Dragons do make it into the playoffs, they will be the second to last season 1 team to make it into the playoffs, leaving the Florida Mayhem as the sole season 1 team to never make a playoff. So that's the storyline like I'm keeping an eye on, as well as like the other ongoing ones. Obviously, I expect the Titans to beat the Defiant, so I expect them to smash that record. I am interested to see how Houston does, just because, like you said, they're starting to show signs of life, but right now they've actually lost, or I should say they haven't won as many maps as the Washington Justice or the Florida Mayhem. So that's something to keep an eye on. Like, they have only won 2 maps this stage. So that's rough. And one of them was yesterday. So just to give you that idea, that is where Houston currently sits, and why we expect more out of them than a negative 15 map differential in this stage alone. So there's some fun stuff going on this last weekend, and then of course we have the playoffs to look forward to, and then the long break. Like, we have the All-Star break. So take it in while you can, because this is the last Overwatch League proper weekend for a few weeks.
Right. And with that in mind, we'll probably be streaming a little bit more regularly during that break period, at least on this channel, for host streams and whatnot. So keep your eyes open for that, and we'll let you know whenever we're planning on doing that. Unfortunately, I slept earlier, so I did not stream before the podcast tonight. But I'm looking forward to the break, obviously. It's always nice to get, a little bit of a refresher. Obviously, we'll still be podcasting. There's still going to be stuff to talk about. Yep. But with that being said, definitely tune in this week. We'll get our full playoff picture. We'll see whether or not Shanghai will be the only Chinese team to make the playoffs, which would be an interesting turnaround, given, past storylines and kind of like what we expected out of the other expansion teams. I just want Shanghai to finish with a winning record this stage.
Yep.
We need to see it happen, because it's the only time they've had a winning record ever. So I hope to see it to completion. But with that being said, we're going to go ahead and close out the show for tonight. So if you guys want to help us out, one of the best ways to do that is to go leave us a review over on iTunes or your podcasting app of choice. We're always looking for ways to improve the show to make for a better listen experience for you. If you'd like to find additional Overwatch-related content, you can do so by checking out Overwatch Recall. There you can find a listing of Overwatch, Overwatch League, Path to Pro, Fantasy Overwatch League, basically anything and everything Overwatch that is available on our website at owlnshow.com/OWRecall. Then every Sunday night, I release a weekly recall, which is the episodic listing of all the prior week's content. And, that's usually posted on the Twitter, so definitely go check that out. I know it was a lighter week this past week. And part of that's probably due to, people traveling out to the Dallas homestand, which is expected. But right now, the content creation side of Overwatch is definitely much larger than what it has been in the past, so definitely go show some support to the other content creators out there as they keep on trekking forward. If you guys would like to support us further, consider checking out our Patreon page. We have tiers starting at just $1 a month, and you can find more information at patreon.com/OWL Network. so you too can join the likes of our master and above patrons, Blaze and Bob, Brendan, and Gabby, in helping our network grow. And we want to thank everyone for your continued support. But Spider, we have a number of different ways how our listeners can get a hold of us, so why don't you go ahead and let them know how they can do that?
Sure thing. If you'd like to shoot us an email, you can do so at contact@owlnshow.com. Our website is www.owlnshow. On the Twitter, you can find us at owlnshow. YouTube is youtube.com/Overwatch League Network. If you'd like to talk to us directly, we're always, floating around the Discord. You can find it at discord.me/OWLN-show. If you're listening to the audio and you'd like to watch us live, as we've mentioned, we do stream multiple times during the week. You can find that at twitch.tv/OWLN-show. We are a Twitch affiliate, so just another way to help support the show. You can subscribe to our channel, get the network emoticon, and you always get notified when we actually go live. So we have multiple shows throughout the week. We have our core show, which is what we're focused on for the pro scene. That is our core pro scene show. I don't want to say our core show because I'd say it's 50-50, and then 0.5 for OWL by the numbers, just to
those
diss
numbers
Bob
don't
and
add
Ramses. just to diss Bob and Ramses. But our main Overwatch Pro show is Overwatch League Network, which is what you're currently listening to. It is Mondays at 7 p.m. Pacific time. Tuesdays we have Overwatch League by the numbers. It's 6 p.m. Pacific time. That is our fantasy Overwatch show. If you're into Overwatch fantasy, I'd listen to that because, like I've said in the past, I've used their own tips to beat them. It didn't happen last week because I forgot to make substitutions.
Wow.
So I lost to Ramses, but not as badly as I thought I would. But that's a different story. Wednesdays, we have our core variety Overwatch show, which is Heroes Never Die. It is Wednesdays at 5 p.m. Pacific time, where they basically talk everything Overwatch. And I'm sure that you and Ed will talk more about the workshop.
Oh, yeah.
Because that has been blowing up Reddit with all the different modes. And it's really interesting to see the community come back. There's a lot of YouTube people that are coming back to Overwatch because of the custom game. So if you want to hear about more workshop stuff, tune in Wednesday. Plus, I'm sure you'll talk about the homestand and all that because Ed will want to bag on the Outlaws as much as possible with you. And then Thursdays, Fridays, Mondays, we do our host streams. Definitely follow us or subscribe so you get notified. I have some educational stuff coming up. I didn't do it last week because we actually moved Heroes Never Die to Thursday. So this Thursday, I'm planning to start the educational stream. So if you want to start learning a little more about Overwatch, definitely pay attention for that because I have something special planned that I didn't get to do last week. And then, of course, like Totem said, we have our Patreon, patreon.com/OWLN network. If you want to find me on Twitter, I'll just get this out of the way now. It's at SpiderGD. Slambo, who is not here, he has returned to the Abyss because him and I are actually the same person. It's like a Jekyll Hyde type of thing. So only one can be dominant at a time. A little Hulk action going on there. If you'd like to talk to that side, it's at Slam Overwatch. But where can they find you, Totem?
Well, I am over on Twitter at TotallyDrunkCTR. And of course, if we are streaming, it'll be on our main channel, which is this one, twitch.tv/OWLN-show. But with that being said, guys, we're going to go ahead and head out for the night. So again, you've been listening to Overwatch League Network. This has been episode number 78. I've been your host, Totally Drunk, joined, I'm not going to say every other week, pretty much as of late, by Spider and, occasionally my #soulmate Slambo. But we hope to see you guys back tomorrow night for our Fantasy Overwatch League show, OWL by the numbers, when Ramses and I troll the hell out of Blaze and Bob and Edinar after our team came out on top in the Podcasters Lounge one. So yeah, that'll be good fun. And yeah, we both put up the highest points of the week too, but Ramses and I won. And at the end of the day, that's all that matters. I'll just take Ed's crown. We're coming for you. But with that being said, guys, take care. Have a good night, and we'll see you back next time. Later.